June 6, 1808. Napoleon Bonaparte of France installs his brother Joseph Bonaparte onto the Spanish throne after forcing the abdication of King Ferdinand VII. Some in the upper echelons of Spanish society and government appeared willing to accept King Ferdinand's abdication, as well as the installment of Joseph Bonaparte as king, but the people of Spain did not. After Ferdinand's abdication, the Council of Castile, the main organ of central government in Spain, quickly lost its authority in areas not directly under French occupation. Regional governments, known as juntas, began springing up throughout the Spanish Empire in order to coordinate and organize resistance against French control. Provincial juntas were overseen by regional juntas. Oftentimes these juntas would operate independently from each other, with many of these councils seeing themselves as the true continuation of the Spanish government. It soon became apparent to the various councils and their leadership that if they were going to mount a serious resistance to French control, then the various juntas would need to cooperate and operate as a cohesive force. On September 25, 1808, a single Supreme Junta was established in Aranjuez by representatives of the various provincial juntas. This new Supreme Junta would be called the Junta of Seville, or the Supreme Central and Governing Junta of Spain and the Indies. In New Spain, Mexico City Council, known as the Ayuntamiento, and the Viceroy of New Spain, José de Iturrigaray, would declare New Spain support for King Ferdinand VII. Although New Spain remained loyal to Spain and to King Ferdinand VII, there was still talk about the possibility of autonomous governance of the colony, at least until Ferdinand could be reinstated as king. The idea of autonomy in New Spain, while Spain was under French influence, was one that was presented to the Ayuntamiento by Peruvian priest Melchor de Talamantes. By September 1st, 1808, Talamantes had written 2 papers to the Ayuntamiento making the case for New Spain's autonomy. The papers written by Talamantes were the National Congress of the Kingdom of New Spain and Representation of the National Colonies, a Philosophical Discussion. Talamantes argued that since France had invaded Spain and installed its own puppet king onto the throne, Spain had lost its sovereignty. Talamantes felt that since Spain's sovereignty had been lost to France, it was the right of the Americas to repossess it. He argued that although the viceroyalties of the Americas were constitutionally independent of each other, they were previously united under one empire through Spain. Thus he suggested that with Spain's sovereignty lost, New Spain could become the new central point of governance. Where once Madrid was the central point of the monarchy, Talamantes argued Mexico City could now fill that role. Melchor de Talamantes proposed that New Spain should create a national congress made up of representatives of all the provinces of New Spain. Executive power would be placed in the hands of the viceroy, in this case José de Iturrigaray, while the already established court would hold judicial power. His proposal also suggested that New Spain could then take this time to pass reforms that perhaps they might not have been able to implement while under the control of Spain, such as agricultural reforms or the implementation of free trade. Pro-Spain conservatives fiercely rejected these proposals, with many in the pro-Spain party taking the stance that making such crucial decisions without the blessing of Spain was essentially treason. Many in the pro-Spanish party would even express the idea that the formation of any such junta in New Spain, by which the province would govern autonomously, would be a step towards the ultimate destruction of the monarchy. Ultimately, on July 19th, the Ayuntamiento of Mexico City would ask José de Iturrigaray to take provincial leadership of New Spain and convoke a junta. This junta was to be made up of representatives from various different cities in New Spain. The supposed reason for the convocation of this junta was to advise the viceroy. This proposal was immediately rejected by the predominantly peninsular Audiencia, which was the highest court in New Spain. Ultimately, the viceroy would hold several open meetings with some of New Spain's most prominent citizens. This included both Criollo and Peninsulares. These meetings were meant to be held in order for these prominent people to advise the viceroy on how to proceed with the governance of the province, with some calling for New Spain to recognize and submit to the authority of the Supreme Central Junta, and others calling New Spain to form its own junta and operate autonomously. About the only thing that those present at the meeting could agree upon was the belief that Ferdinand VII was the rightful king and that New Spain would continue to defy any attempt at rule from the French usurpers. In late August, tensions would begin to grow sharper as representatives of the Supreme Junta arrived in Mexico City. The representatives of the Supreme Junta demanded that the viceroy swear his allegiance to the Junta of Seville or face arrest, but the viceroy refused. Iturrigaray justified his refusal by suggesting that the Junta of Seville, despite being the Supreme Junta, was only one of various juntas which claimed to be the true legitimate continuation of the Spanish government. The viceroy further suggested that he was waiting for further developments on the situation in Spain before he swore his allegiance to any one junta. Pro-Spain conservatives grew suspicious of what they saw as the viceroy's apparent defiance of the authority of the Supreme Junta. Their suspicion led them to believe that perhaps the viceroy was favorable to autonomist ideals, such as those expressed by Melchor de Talamantes. This suspicion was fueled further when the viceroy began to reach out to the ayuntamientos of Mexico's principal cities and asked them to send representatives to Mexico City for a provisional congress. Now, fearing that the viceroy might move towards independence, pro-Spanish conservatives moved to remove Iturrigaray from power. September 15, 1808. Conservatives fear that the viceroy's refusal to submit to the authority of the Supreme Junta, while also moving to hold provisional congress, might give the impression that the government was in disarray. Conservatives fear that any indication of disorganization in the government might lead to an upheaval from the lower castes, which had been taking the brunt of the negative economic effects brought on by the political chaos in Spain. Thus, in order to protect the interests of the predominantly white upper classes and to ensure that New Spain wouldn't achieve autonomy or independence, conservatives moved to overthrow Iturrigaray. So just before midnight on September 15, 1808, units under the command of Gabriel Yermo, a sugar merchant, formed outside of the viceroy's palace. These units were made up of volunteers as well as some freed slaves from Yermo's own plantation. They referred to themselves as the Volunteers of Ferdinand VII. These so-called Volunteers of Ferdinand were able to easily access the palace grounds, this being due to the fact that among those who supported the coup against Viceroy, there happened to be merchants who financially financed the palace guards. In fact, the guards themselves were brought on as part of the conspiracy against the Viceroy, actively cooperating by simply looking the other way and allowing the insurrectionists to carry out their plans. As a result of securing the cooperation of the palace guards, the infiltration of the palace went off without any bloodshed. Well, except for one guard who apparently wasn't let in on the plan and attempted to stop the insurrectionists and was killed. Now, other than that one minor hiccup, the conspirators were able to capture Viceroy de Iturrigaray while he slept, arresting him immediately. The Viceroy's sons were also taken into custody by the conspirators. Now, after the success of their coup and the arrest of the Viceroy, pro-Spain conservatives also arrested Melchor de Talamantes. Both men would then be shipped to Spain to face charges of disloyalty. Ultimately, Iturrigaray would be freed, although he would die in 1815. Melchor de Talamantes would die of yellow fever while being transported to face charges in Spain. Now, with Iturrigaray being forcefully removed from office, leaving a vacant viceroyalty position, the position was passed on to the oldest and highest-ranking military officer in the colony. In this case, it was an older gentleman named Pedro de Garibay, who, aside from being fiercely loyal to Spain, also happened to be a puppet of the Audiencia, which was predominantly peninsular. In fact, one of the reasons that Garibay was appointed to the position as viceroy was his willingness to serve the interests of the pro-Spanish conservatives and the Audiencia. Some may even argue that Garibay held no true authority and was simply put into the viceroyalty to be a puppet in the service of the pro-Spanish party, pushing forth their agenda. Garibay's first test as viceroy began soon after the coup of Iturrigaray. Garibay was faced with the backlash of the arrest of the former viceroy, as well as the arrests of other advocates for autonomy, such as Melchor de Talamantes. The coup, as well as the resulting arrests made by the pro-Spanish party, resulted in a surge of cries of death to bad government, although it should be noted that the grievances of the people were not towards the king, Ferdinand VII, but towards local government, which was viewed as corrupt. In fact, Mexicans at the time still had great love and respect for King Ferdinand VII, and wished to see him restored to the throne. The sentiment of discontent with local authorities seemed to grow stronger with the abdication of Ferdinand, with the people seeing their king as essentially being held hostage. Meanwhile, mere mortals had taken charge and had begun to screw everything up. And in the wake of the unrest, the Inquisition in Mexico barred hand-operating printing presses to keep further anti-government flyers from being printed and passed around. The Inquisition also began to openly pursue and arrest anyone who dared speak ill of the government. As the Inquisition hunted down those critical of the government, Garibay would declare that all citizens should contribute money to the war effort as a means of showing their support of Spain and for the king. Now, despite the best efforts, the policies and decrees of the Viceroy, as well as the harsh actions undertaken by the Inquisition, did little to quell the unrest. Given his inability to adequately deal with public agitation, as well as the Supreme Junta kind of realizing he was basically a puppet to the Audiencia, Viceroy Garibay was removed from office in July 1809, replaced by Archbishop Francisco Javier de Lizana. As Viceroy, Lizana would form new military units for the provincial militias. He would import weapons from Great Britain, and he would seize the lands of any peninsulares who had declared for Joseph Bonaparte. He would then use those lands as collateral for loans to support the Spanish resistance. And he donated his entire salary to the war effort. Much like Garibay, Lizana was loyal to Spain. However, he would be accused by the Audiencia of being partial to criollos, as he took little action to deal with the pro-autonomy sentiment in New Spain. His loyalty would specifically come into question upon the discovery of a pro-independence conspiracy in Valladolid on December 21st, 1809. The Conspiracy of Valladolid was a plan to overthrow the Junta in Mexico City and replace it with a new government in the name of Ferdinand VII. The conspiracy was led by José María Obeso, a captain in the town militia, as well as José Mariano Michelena. These men were joined by an assortment of priests, military men, lawyers, and various other distinguished men, mostly criollos. Although the conspirators had managed to secure the cooperation and support of members of local militia as well as regular military, they were not able to secure a large enough force to carry out their plan. So in order to bolster their numbers, the conspirators looked towards the recruitment of indigenous peasants into their rebel army. Indigenous support was paid for through the promise of relief from the enforcement of tribute payments, which was highly tempting due to the fact that the lower castes, such as mestizos and indigenous Mexicans, were suffering the most from the economic effects of the war effort against the French usurpers. The relief from the tribute payments would allow the indigenous peasants to focus what meager resources they had at their disposal toward dealing with the economic effects of the war effort, such as famine. After securing the numbers needed to launch their coup, the conspirators planned to launch their campaign on December 24th, 1809. Before the Conspiracy of Valladolid managed to take off, however, they were betrayed. A young military officer turned in the conspirators, leading it to its discovery on December 21st, 1809. This officer was a young Agustín de Iturbide. After their arrest, the conspirators were brought to Mexico City under the orders of Viceroy Lizana in order to face trial. During the trial, the conspirators were defended by Carlos María de Bustamante. Bustamante would go on to argue that the conspirators actually committed no crime and merely attempted to preserve the nation in the name of King Ferdinand VII. He argued that the conspirators acted on the suspicion that the predominantly peninsular government was seeking to turn over New Spain to the French usurper on the throne, and that their actions were those of devout patriots acting in service of their homeland and their king. Bustamante would go on to make the argument that the day that the first insurgent is hanged, Spain must abandon any hope of holding on to America. Viceroy Lizana was sympathetic, and as a result, the Valladolid conspirators were only given mild punishments. For example, some of the military officers involved were simply moved to new positions or demoted. Michelena and Obeso would ultimately be allowed to return to their duties, although they would be arrested again after the outbreak of the War of Independence in 1810. This leniency did not sit well with the pro-Spanish party, and as a result, Lizana was removed from the viceroyalty, being replaced by Francisco Javier Venegas as viceroy. The Conspiracy of Valladolid is considered by some as the precursor for the War of Independence. The discovery and subsequent dispersal of the conspiracy did nothing to quell animosity against the pro-Spanish colonial regime in New Spain. In fact, many of the plotters and co-conspirators of Valladolid began to formulate their own plans for overthrowing the junta in Mexico City and establishing their own autonomous government in the name of the king. One such conspiracy would eventually lead New Spain into full-out civil war, pitting pro-Spanish and pro-autonomous forces against each other. This conspiracy was known as the Queretaro Conspiracy and will be covered in our next video. So if you enjoyed this brief look into Mexican history and would like to learn more Mexican history, hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. So I plan on making several more videos covering Mexico's war for independence, after which I'll probably move on into the First Mexican Empire, the First Mexican Republic, and other eras of Mexico's history. And if you'd like to be a part of my community here where we talk about Mexican history, consider also checking out my other social media platforms, which will be listed down below. And this includes things like my Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Now remember, all the sources, all the links, books, articles used to create this video are listed down below, just in case you want to jump down the rabbit hole of Mexican history on your own. Remember, my videos only serve to give you a brief look into Mexican history, so I highly suggest that you go out and you read about this on your own and you learn about our history. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time when we talk about the Queretaro Conspiracy. Thank you for watching.